Patrice, please let me know when we should start.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Hey, Diane, I don't think your thing's on, your video.
Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand for me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, with liberty and justice for all.
And indivisibility, too.
All of it. Welcome to this special meeting. This 23rd day of March 2020. We are better.
It's fancy.
There you are.
Diane, we see you.
There you go.
So welcome to this special meeting. This is our first ever virtual meeting. We are practicing social distancing. And we have a couple of presentations. First, can I turn it over to our city attorney, who's going to tell us why we're not going to do agenda item number 1?
Is it possible, Mr. Mayor, that I can do the roll call first?
Actually, that's a great idea.
Thank you.
I'm here.
Councilmember Lee?
Here.
Councilmember Pappen?
Here.
Councilmember Bonilla?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Rodriguez?
Here.
And Mayor Goethals?
Here.
Thank you.
So, as I was saying at this time, we have a first agenda item which deals with the Brown Act and creating a subcommittee for participation in the county briefings that were going on daily. I want to turn it over to Sean Mason just to briefly describe how the governor modified the Brown Act during this time so that we don't have to create that subcommittee anymore and we can all participate in that. Is that correct, Sean?
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Mayor. So about a week ago, the county manager began daily briefings and updates for the elected officials in the county on what was happening at the countywide level in terms of the disaster and response. And there was an issue about council member majorities of different councils participating in that because it didn't seem to be allowed under the terms of the Brown Act that allowed for a majority in one time and place to hear something within their subject matter jurisdiction. And so on Saturday, the governor did suspend that requirement of the Brown Act to allow for elected officials, a majority, if not all of them, to participate in those county manager meetings.
Thank you very much, Sean. So let's move on to the next agenda item.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Before we start on this next agenda item, I know we're all very eager and we want to help people in this time of crisis. None of us is alone in that desire. I'm just wondering, since we talked about this last week, the county is going to take up their own moratorium on evictions as it relates to the residential. And so I was wondering if we might consider putting aside the residential part of it. I know Councilmember Lee was on that call as well, and the county said cities aren't going to need to act. If they act, and their ordinance as it relates to the residential would affect our city as well. So I'm wondering if we couldn't maybe table that part of it. It'll make streamline our process tonight as it relates to the commercial. And if the county doesn't act tomorrow, 14 hours from now, we can certainly meet, say, maybe on Wednesday and take up the residential if we need to. What do you think about that?
That sounds like you're stealing a page from Sean's presentation that he's about to give. I think that you're making a reasonable point. I want to give everybody an opportunity to respond to that. I think you're also hinting at the concept that the council wants this protection to be in place for all residents, and we haven't quite gotten to that point where we've all voiced that. This is the forum for us to do that. We definitely wanted to place it on an agenda so that we could have that discussion. I think we may end up going with what you're suggesting, but I want to wait until after Sean's presentation. I don't think it'll save us that much time to just put it aside at this point, as opposed to doing that at the end of the presentation. Is there anyone else who wants to speak to that issue?
I'd like to be able to hear the presentation. I think there are some things to discuss, even though the county's planning to do that.
Okay, I heard you, Rick. And Eric, I think I heard you about to speak.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out how to raise my hand virtually. Yeah, so I definitely agree with Councilmember Pappen, but I'm fine with hearing the presentation.
Okay. Amaris, did you have an opinion on this? Amaris, do you want to unmute yourself and then say it again?
I'm happy to hear the presentation as well.
Okay. I'm going to have you go forward with your presentation, Sean. I appreciate all the time that you put into it, and I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Can everyone see that?
Not yet.
Does anyone see the PowerPoint slide?
Not yet, Sean.
Not yet.
Let me try again. Still can't see the presentation?
No.
There we go.
Here we go.
Okay, still see it?
Yes.
Okay, great. So briefly an overview of the presentation. I'll give a background on what's happened since last week, where we've been and what's happened since then. I'll then address the features of the ordinance that was included in the packet, go over a couple of changes in the ordinance from the time that the packet was published, and then walk the council through some options for action tonight. So last Monday, the City Council declared a local emergency in response to challenges presented by the community spread of the novel coronavirus and disease COVID-19. After declaring this emergency, under reports and announcements, the mayor reported breaking news on what appeared to be a decision by the governor to impose a moratorium on tenant evictions for non-payment of rent caused in some way by the COVID-19 crisis. Operating on the understanding that the action was not required to address residential tenants, the council expressed a concern about the impact of this crisis on small businesses and directed the city attorney to prepare an ordinance for council consideration at tonight's meeting that would protect small business tenants from eviction for the non-payment of rent caused by the COVID-19 crisis. Immediately after the council meeting, we learned that the governor's order did not impose an eviction moratorium, but merely authorized cities and counties to do so. In drafting this ordinance, I included a provision that would apply to residential tenants in addition to small business tenants. Following this meeting, a series of conference calls involving county council and the county city attorneys were held with the goal of exploring a uniform approach to the issue to see if that was possible. By the end of the week, the county manager announced that county staff would be presenting to the County Board of Supervisors on March 24th a county-wide residential tenant eviction moratorium. The county manager made clear that county staff would not be including small business tenants in their ordinance. Because we cannot be certain that the board will approve the proposed ordinance, and because the county ordinance will not apply to small business tenants, the ordinance presented applies to both residential and small business tenants. I'd like to now go to the features of the ordinance. The ordinance with respect to residential tenants is those provisions are found in section 4 of the ordinance. It would establish an eviction moratorium on the non-payment of rent due to COVID-19 impacts, as well as no-fault evictions. With respect to the non-payment of rent provisions, under those provisions, the landlord may not evict tenants if they know the tenant cannot pay rent because of the COVID-19 impacts. Under the ordinance, a landlord knows the tenant cannot pay rent if within 14 days of the rent due date, the tenant provides the landlord in writing an explanation of how COVID-19 has impacted their ability to pay rent and documents supporting their claim. The tenant still must pay the rent, but the obligation to pay rent is deferred until 6 months after the emergency is lifted. In terms of enforcement, the ordinance provides for enforcement through the city's ordinary legal remedies, in addition to a tenant defense to an unlawful detainer action, and authorizes an affirmative case brought by the tenant for injunction and damages. As to the no-fault provisions, eviction provisions, the policy interest in including those appears to be consistency with the state and local health orders to keep people at home during this crisis. Turning to the small business provisions, those are found in section 5, and the provisions are the same as those for residential tenants, except that there is a provision added to define the term small business. The small business definition was borrowed from the City of San Francisco emergency order. At the time, that was the only jurisdiction that we were aware of that did enact a commercial tenancy protection moratorium. And San Francisco defines small business as a business with gross receipts of $25 million or less. Over the weekend, I consulted with our finance department who reviewed our business license tax records, and that indicates that about 89% of city businesses would be considered small businesses under this definition. If the council sees a problem with this approach, we can always adjust the numbers up and down or discuss alternative approaches. There have been a few added provisions to the ordinance after it was published with the agenda. There were findings reflecting the governor's actions to authorize the moratoria and to impose the shelter-in-place statewide provisions. And then there's an administrative appeal provision that has been added by which a landlord could seek an appeal of a decision that they cannot evict their tenant. And those provisions were added to make the ordinance more defensible to someone who was challenging the ordinance on its face as opposed to as applied to them. Can you still hear me? You can
Yes.
still hear me?
Yes,
I
Sean,
can.
we can.
Yeah. Okay. Do you still see the PowerPoint slide program?
Yes, Sean,
Yes.
we do.
I don't see it on my screen. It was dropped for some poor connection is what the message I got. But so in any event, the options are to do nothing and then wait until the county acts tomorrow. As indicated, the county does have the intention of adopting a residential eviction moratorium tomorrow. So the council could wait and see what the county does. The council could choose to go forward with the commercial aspects of the ordinance, and or do both if it wanted to. If the council did do both and included the residential provisions, there is the concern that the ordinances aren't exactly the same. I think in substance they cover basically the same transactions, modeled on the same order out of Santa Monica, but there are some technical procedural differences, and so that would create an issue potentially. If the council wanted to enact something on residential tonight, we could add a provision indicating that that provision of the ordinance would be of no legal effect if the county acts in that area. Or we can go forward with just Section 5, delete Section 4, and not have any residential provisions. That's it for the presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Sean. I don't know if all the council members have the meeting chat visible on their screen right now. I see that Rick has indicated on the meeting chat that he has questions. So Rick, why don't you go ahead with your questions?
Yeah, thank you. I want to thank Sean for his presentation. I do have one question because I observed in the mayor's order that he made enabling these actions last week that he said that as a result of his actions, cities or counties would be able to take this type of action with regards to residential tenants, homeowners, or business tenants. And so I wonder, Sean, could you explain to us why we don't have anything here for homeowners?
So my understanding is that the federal government has taken action with respect to a moratorium on foreclosures on any loans backed by Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, FHA, which my understanding is almost virtually all mortgages. So that was why we focused on the rent provisions. If there's a need to address foreclosure, if there's an interest in addressing foreclosure, if the council gives that direction, we can work on that this week for next Monday.
Okay, so can I have one last question?
Of course. Go ahead,
yeah.
Rick.
Seeing that I have what I feel is legitimate weariness of the federal government, and knowing that they said that, I have questions about how long it might take them to actually do that or bring it to effect. Would it hurt anything if we did it our own approach to this and provided protection for homeowners, and then the federal government came back with their own protection?
Can I ask a point of clarification, Rick?
Yeah.
Is the protection that you're talking about, is it to keep homeowners in their home for the period of time of this emergency, or is it some other economic, financial protection that you're looking for?
No, it would be the same as with renters. Keep them in their home until this emergency passes.
Okay, so the nexus again is keep everybody where they are for the period of this emergency because it's a public health crisis for them to go out and be in the public looking for other housing. Plus, it's a huge emotional distress for anyone to be worried about where they're going to be sleeping tomorrow night.
Well said. Thank you.
Okay. So Sean, is that accurate that we haven't really contemplated that as part of this, or would that be a minor tweak to the ordinance that we have in front of us?
You know, I would have a Brown Act concern in that the agenda indicates that we're considering adoption of an emergency ordinance imposing a moratorium on evictions for non-payment of rents by tenants,
Got
as
it.
opposed
So,
to a foreclosure. So my preference would be to work on, if that's the council's will, to work on that this week and bring it back for next month.
can we add that to the end of your option list here then? Is the
Sure.
option of bringing back protections for homeowners to stay in their home during this period and not be evicted?
Okay.
Other questions from other council members? I see Diane has a question. Go ahead, Diane.
Yeah, this is the first time that foreclosure has come up. And I would certainly be willing to take a look at that. I just had thought that banks are federally regulated. I wasn't too sure we could do it. So I'd like to ask our city attorney, initially, can we take this on even though the feds regulate the banks? It is a missing element, no question about it, and I would be interested in it. I just, I want to, before we go on a fool's errand, I'd like to make sure that it is a possibility.
Yeah, and as that's the work I would do between now and next Monday to determine whether we could do it. Rick's correct that it was included in the governor's order. So from the governor's perspective, we can do it.
Okay. Great. Okay. Thank you.
I would second Rick's concern, and I would also say that I would want us to bring that back because it is a local land use issue, and we're doing something for the public health, for the benefit of public health to local people. And so in that regard, I think it is something that should be considered by us after Sean's had an opportunity to look at that. Eric, you have questions? Go ahead, Eric.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This question is for Sean. I know that in the staff report, you touched upon a little bit the legal liabilities with these various components of these ordinances. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that that the county kind of looked at both, and you might have talked with the county's attorney, and they felt much more comfortable with the residential one as opposed to the residential side of things as opposed to the business side of things. Could you talk a little bit more about that difference and why particular and how much liability do you think we would actually face, especially on the business side, if we were to enact something like this?
So the first part of that, I think from the way the county council was looking at the issue, they were drawing a clearer connection between keeping people in their homes and sort of health and safety impacts of people being displaced and put out on the street through eviction from their home as being a health and safety concern. And they felt that that was a direct health and safety concern that justified these extraordinary actions in terms of interfering in the ordinary ability of a landlord to evict their tenant. And they didn't see that direct connection to a health and safety concern and a health and safety interest in a commercial landlord-tenant relationship. And so I think that difference is what caused them to be reluctant to go forward with a commercial moratorium eviction. In terms of exposure to liability, it's difficult to give a sense of that. The ordinance does authorize and actually require the tenant to pay the rent at some time. It just defers it. So it seems to me that the actual exposure, that the landlord isn't really suffering significant damages as a consequence of the adoption of the ordinance. That doesn't mean that a lawsuit wouldn't come and that we would expend resources in terms of defending the lawsuit. And if our analysis is incorrect and they do have a claim, potentially a judge could see that they've got damages that are greater than a delay in receiving their rent, but I wouldn't think the exposure for damages would be that significant.
And if the county was to act like, which I think by all, from everything I'm hearing, that it's almost certainty that they're going to act, that would mean that obviously our city would not be out in the open for those lawsuits, and everything. The county itself would be the ones that would be in charge of any, or be responsible for any litigation that comes from that. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So if the county were to enact a residential eviction moratorium, and the city was refrained from adopting such a moratorium, and a residential landlord sued or challenged that ordinance, we would not be exposed to having to defend that lawsuit. We wouldn't be exposed to any liability because it would be an action of the county as opposed to the city.
I mean, isn't that a pretty big benefit of kind of getting back to what Councilmember Pappen was talking about, of waiting to see if they could use the resources of the county to fend off those potential lawsuits instead of the city trying to do that?
Yes, it's a significant benefit of not taking action and having the county take it, because we then are not exposed to that type of litigation.
Great, thank you. Those are my questions for now. Thanks.
Any other questions before we go to public comment at this time?
One more, please.
Go ahead.
Sean, is there a significant difference between what the county is contemplating on doing for residential tenants compared to ours?
No, not a significant difference. We use the same model in terms of what the core provisions of the ordinance are. An order that was issued in Santa Monica, so it basically presents the same. There are some minor differences in terms of process in the ordinances, but it's basically the same in terms of the amount of protection.
Thank you.
I should say that this morning, we received a email from County Council that described some changes that they are contemplating. They haven't yet committed to making changes in their ordinance as a result of conversations that they've had with the Apartment Owners Association. And so there may be some changes in the limited time I had to kind of go through those and digest them. It didn't seem like, from a substantive perspective, it made that much of a difference.
Thank you.
Okay, I see that Amrance has questions now. Go ahead, Amrance.
This is a question for Sean. So I'm wondering if our council were to decide to take action today, and in the ordinance explicitly defer to the county's action, would that pose any significant liability for us to take the first step, knowing that within potentially 24 hours or maybe a week on the outside, that the county's order will take precedence?
I think that if we were to adopt the ordinance and it was addressed to both commercial and residential tenants, And we included a provision that said that the portion of our ordinance addressed to residential tenancies would no longer be of any effect if the Board of Supervisors enacts an ordinance covering that same subject. Then I think we would still have the same benefits of the county action. We would no longer have a provision of any effect on the books.
So effectively, what I hear you saying is that there's virtually no liability downside in us taking action tonight with that stipulation.
Yeah, if we include that kind of provision.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we go to public comment? Seeing none. Patrice, can I ask you how many public comments we have?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I have one at this time through the e-comment system, and I just want to remind council that we did send all of the comments received since the release of package to clerk@cityofsanmateo.org to your emails at 4:38 p.m.
Great. Thank you very much, and I believe we received all of that, so let's go forward with the one additional comment that you have at this time. Thank you, Patrice.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. The comment is from Paul Tappan, and he writes, please consider all sides and think of the trickle-down effect of depriving small landlords, especially my retired mother, from their sole source of revenue. Landlords still need to pay their mortgages, property taxes, income taxes, insurance, utilities, and any needed repairs during this same time period. Some tenants may have to work from home or have a decrease in income, just like most landlords. Both still have bills, and neither may have huge rainy day savings. Any protections being considered should not be afforded to one group of citizens only. It should be afforded to all. If you are simply saying to suspend evictions, that is well and good. If you're thinking of more, please don't hurt the people that are supporting the housing community alone without government support or assistance of any kind. Also, will there be proof of hardship or less income imposed on those that are going to request to not pay now, instead pay a large sum later? Thank you. And I just refreshed my screen, and that is the only public comment I have.
Great. Okay, I will go ahead and close the public comment period. I want to bring it back to the council and specifically to Sean Mason, the city attorney, to address some of the items that were brought up in that question. I have a few questions based on that, which are, number one, is this conveying an economic benefit where we're saying that tenants don't have to pay landlords anymore? Sean, you're going to have to unmute yourself. Sorry.
That would help. The tenant would have to pay. The obligation to pay is deferred for 6 months after the termination of the emergency.
Could we say up to 6 months?
We're not choosing winners and losers here. We're not interfering in the financial relationship between the parties. The real nexus here is between the public health emergency and people not moving. And it seems to me that people can't move anyway because you can't hire movers. We're not supposed to be gathering in groups of people large enough to fill a moving van and move someone. There's virtually no vacancy out there, nowhere for anyone to go, and you're not going to get a new tenant to move in either. I think there's also a part of this ordinance that allows Drew flexibility. It allows the city manager or the emergency operations director flexibility to address any financial hardship that is borne by any specific individual. Is that correct?
That's correct. That was the administrator review provision that was added between publication and today.
Okay, I think that's an important thing for that particular comment and that speaker. Any other questions based on the public comment? Any other questions or comments from the council?
I have one.
Go ahead, Rick.
For Sean, is not the property owner leasing units to residential tenants protected under the small business portion of our ordinance?
I think we can make that more explicit if that's the intention of the council, that small business would include not only the dollar amount, but also a statement that small businesses include persons involved in the renting of rental housing.
Thank you.
So I can go.
Go ahead, Diane.
Yes. So for my purposes, I would, as I indicated before, I haven't changed my mind. I would prefer to see what the county does. I think it's if you will, a more elegant way to go. We can see what they come up with. There's no chance of inconsistency. Our right to act as it relates to the residential. With respect to business commercial aspect of the ordinance, and I think following up on what Rick just mentioned about including maybe landlords in that, that would be fine with me. I know that we have so many small businesses in the city of San Mateo, and I feel like when the moratorium or the shelter in place comes to an end, the sooner they can get back up and running, the better. And if there is some reserved cash by giving this moratorium on evictions, I think it's going to go a long way to getting people back to work and getting our entire community back on its feet. I just saw something today that 90% of restaurants have like less than 10 employees. So we're really going to be helping a lot of our small businesses that exist. I know in our city in particular, we have so many small businesses. So I feel, and I know I'm probably not alone, but I really feel like the minute the emergency is over and the shelter in place is over, it provides the fastest way that we can help our small businesses. So that's where I am on that one. And I would prefer to, I think it's more elegant to wait to see what the county does and we get one straight item on the books.
So what about our landlords and the provision in this ordinance to protect landlords or actually give them some financial benefit? Do you want to give that to Drew as the emergency operations director to try to work that out for those who are bearing the burden here?
As it relates to the commercial?
No, as it relates to the residential.
I would prefer to see where the county goes in the entirety of the residential.
Is that part of the county's ordinance, Sean?
Well, they haven't taken it up yet, so presumably there could be some tweaks tomorrow. And the reason why I think it's more elegant to wait for the county to do it is because then we'll have a countywide ordinance that's consistent city by city by city. And I think there's some benefit to that. So we'll have to see. That could be added tomorrow. I just don't know.
Okay. Other comments? Anybody? Eric, I think you were raising your hand. Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay. So first off, I mean, I think that I'm not hearing any disagreement from any council member in that we want to do something, we need to act. Especially, I mean, everybody's hurting in this crisis. We've talked a lot about renters and they're probably hit the hardest, but also on the business side. I have yet to meet a small business in San Mateo or the region who is not struggling. We're seeing every single business being impacted, and I really think it's important to act. I think for me right now, it's a question of how to best act, and I'm a little bit concerned. I mean, I know it would. Well, I guess the first question I have for Sean, I wanted to ask first is, have any other cities kind of jumped ahead of the county and tried to make their own policy without waiting to see what the county's going to do that we know of?
Not in the county that I'm aware of. There are other cities that have done it, but not in our county.
So I really feel like this is one of these things where sure, it could be like a attention-grabbing headline to say, oh, San Mateo was the first to act. They were the ones that acted on this. But I really have to look at like what I think is the most prudent thing to do. And this crisis is hitting us as a region. I'm concerned that if we enact our own version, and then it ends up deferring to the counties, that's going to be a communication, making the communication much more difficult. I think if we wait for the county to act, and assuming that they do, it's going to make the communication a lot more effective, and it's going to eventually help with enforcement. That nobody thinks there's going to be different standards for different. For different cities in this region. I also think that the county is in a really unique position to deal with some of the unintended consequences that might happen with Measure K and all of that, and able to allocate those funds, I think is another big difference between the city and the county. And I think that whether or not we wait for them and then we act, because I think everybody here, no one would disagree that they're not going to act here. I haven't heard that. So it's just a difference, do we act now only to be erased later and have that go out there in the public and then all the questions, or do we just do this simple thing and wait? And to me, that makes more sense to me. That's the cleanest solution, and that's where I'm going to be voting for. And in terms of the businesses, I'm all set to do that part of it tonight, because I think that needs to be done. And the county is not, as far as I know, addressing that issue. Those are my comments.
Rick, you're muted. Rick. Go ahead, Rick.
Thank you. One last comment. So the end of the month will be upon us in one more week. And this is definitely a time urgent matter. I feel that it would be best for us to be more prudent in protecting the citizens, the businesses, and the homeowners of San Mateo, knowing that it's possible that the county may do nothing tomorrow. So thinking about that, I have no problem with using the provision that would say that if the county adopts its ordinance, we would defer to that after review. But that's my thinking on that.
So I have a question for Sean. Sean, are you aware of any tenants in the city of San Mateo who have received eviction notices?
I received an email today. I think that is about someone who had received an eviction notice. I don't think it was for non-payment of rent. And then I've heard, with respect to the commercial side of things, the county manager mentioned that in a recent conference call with city attorneys and city managers that there's anecdotal evidence that some commercial tenants have received eviction notices.
Is that in the city of San Mateo, or?
He didn't specify.
Can I cut in?
Go ahead, Rick.
I believe we received an email from Reina Gonzalez saying that she only had 2 weeks left to live in her place. She was being evicted. It's in very rough English because she speaks Spanish, but that was the message she conveyed.
But it is that the unlawful detainer department at the courts is not in operation right now. Is that right?
That's right.
That's
And
an
also-
interesting distinction that Diane's making about whether these things can actually be enforced or whether one of the tangential benefits of this ordinance is that it discourages landlords from sending that letter, that eviction letter that tells somebody that their rent is either going to go up exorbitantly or that they only have a few weeks left and they need to leave. I think a lot of unsavvy tenants would not know what to do with that letter, and they might move out before they reach out to the city council. So one of the benefits is certainly to discourage those letters from going out. I believe I know the building, Sean, that you were talking about, and all of the tenants in that building have received letters, 60-day notices that they have to get out. And frankly, they're some of the people who I have in mind with this ordinance, that if they don't get a protection from us, if they don't hear the message from us that we're going to protect them during this critical period, they're going to spend the next few weeks going out every day trying to find a roof to put over their head. And I don't know what the county's going to do. Even if the county does act, I don't see any harm in us giving them the protection right now with the language that was suggested by Emirates.
The
I have a
county's not
question,
seeking
Joe.
to protect commercial.
Go ahead, Eric. Eric has a question.
Yeah, so I hear what you were saying, Mr. Mayor, and what I'm thinking is that if tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. we're going to get a lot more information here, and if we wanted to, and they don't act, we could notice a meeting as soon as possible, which I would definitely be in favor for. So we're talking like hours here, not weeks. So I think that's important with the courts closed right now and how fast we are actually moving anyway. I'm not concerned that 12 hours is going to make that big a difference, especially when every single council member here is voicing their strong support for such measures here.
Okay.
So
Emirates, I'm not sure I hear where you're at just yet.
if I may, I think that's why I suggested if we could just table this until Wednesday. I think I agree with Councilmember Rodriguez. Everyone is concerned, and so it isn't it's how we take action. I think this is the most methodical way to go. Sorry for interjecting. I know you called on Amaranth, so I apologize there. But I want to concur that I'm willing to take it up Wednesday if the county doesn't act. No ifs, ands, or buts.
Okay. Thank you, Diane. Amaris, do you have anything to add?
I wanted to ask a clarifying question about the communication piece. So Councilmember Rodriguez brought up a concern about there being mixed messages potentially if we were to act tonight. And I absolutely appreciate that there seems to be very clear consensus that we want to act and that we want to provide as much protection to as many stakeholders as possible. But I was hoping to get some feedback from the staff about the communication piece in terms of that being a legitimate point of confusion or friction if we were to move forward today. Based on what Sean is saying, it seems to me like there's almost no legal downside or liability downside. So from an operations and communication standpoint, I want to better understand what that concern is from the staff.
And so I think that would be a city manager response as opposed to, city attorney response.
Is the emergency operations director on the call?
Sorry, I was muted. Forgive me. I don't think operationally it's going to impact us one way or another in terms of the execution. I mean, I understand the perspective of it's potentially a little confusing if we do something that then is overridden by a county ordinance. But I think if we communicate it well, that's something that could be overcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Drew. Sean, do you have that last slide of your presentation?
Let me try to get there.
If I could paraphrase, the first option was do nothing. I haven't heard anybody.
It's up on the screen.
You can see the slides?
Oh, there it is. There it is. Got it.
Great.
First option, do nothing. Rick, it wasn't on my screen, but now it is.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. First option is do nothing. I haven't heard anybody suggest that that's what they want to do. The second option would be to wait for the county to act. I've heard, I don't know, maybe 3 of us who are comfortable going forward with the provision that Amaranth suggested that would be to pass the full ordinance with both the commercial and residential tonight and add the provision that Sean suggested that defers to the county ordinance on residential if they pass their ordinance tomorrow. The other option would be to go forward on the commercial side and then come back on Wednesday night to address residential if it has not been passed by the county. And then this last part, which is any changes. Does anyone feel like it is an arbitrary definition of small business and that there's no reason not to include all commercial property? That was something that I had been talking about with Sean, and I thought perhaps we don't need to limit this to an arbitrary definition of small business, but actually apply it to all commercial lease agreements. Anybody have an opinion on that?
If I may. Yeah, if with the cutoff of 25 million and that's in revenues, Sean, is that correct?
Gross receipts.
Gross receipts, 25 million. That's a pretty big company. Companies with that kind of gross receipts either own their building or they have plenty of resources to cover their rent. I don't know if we need to go above that.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point. Anyone else have a comment on that?
I concur.
Okay, Amaranth?
I was feeling that the threshold borrowing from San Francisco County alone seemed a little arbitrary, and so I had asked Sean if we could use the SBA definition of small business, which is very specifically regulated and defined by industry, and I think a more definitive source for us to make a determination about what qualifies for a small business. And my thought was that the intent, as was expressed in the meeting, was really focusing this support and resources to small businesses specifically.
Is it your belief that that would cover fewer businesses or more businesses?
It depends. We didn't get very clearly into how their definitions would apply to all of our businesses. So I don't have a very clear sense. It was just, from my perspective, a more, to borrow Councilmember Pappin's language, more elegant way to define it that that's using sort of an industry standard.
Okay.
If
My
I
concern
might-
would be that it would actually protect fewer people, but go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, if I might, we did discuss that, and I had one of my assistants look into whether there is a clear, easy to reference SBA standard for what amounts to what is a small business. And her experience was it's pretty challenging, and that there are, for example, they have different standards by industry. And even then, it's sort of different standards for different purposes. So, in a couple of hours that my assistant had to sort of find something that I could point to in the reference in the ordinance, she wasn't very successful at sort of coming up with that. That's sort of the challenge with using that resource.
Well, then if administratively that poses more challenges than using a $25 million gross receipt threshold, then I'm fine with that.
Okay.
If I could add one other comment, one of the things that Councilmember Lee and I spoke about that I would also like to suggest if we are going to adopt a business eviction moratorium is to add the term and nonprofit entities after small business, so that it covers small businesses and nonprofit entities regardless of their gross receipts, because they aren't in the gross receipts business.
Does anyone disagree with that? That sounds like a great catch. Okay, I don't hear any disagreement. So let's go ahead and add that language, Sean.
Okay.
Sean, am I correct that whichever of these we choose to take up tonight, or both, they need 4 votes to pass? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And Eric and Diane, I hear you both wanting to wait until Wednesday on the residential portion of this ordinance. Is that right?
Right. I would be fine with either the second option or the third option.
Diane?
Yeah,
It sounds like I don't think it's your first preference to do the inelegant voting of it tonight for the residential portion, but if we did that, we don't have to come back Wednesday either way, and if the county acts, then it will supersede ours.
Well, it will, but you don't know exactly how the counties is going to turn out. Until they have that meeting at 9 a.m. tomorrow, we're not going to know. So I really want to see how theirs comes out and see what they do with the residential. I would like to take the action on the business tenants tonight.
Okay. I was trying to shorten it there, but let's do this how we normally do it, which is somebody make a motion and then we'll vote.
I have a motion. Go ahead, Diane.
I would move that we adopt the ordinance as it relates to business tenants tonight, adding in the for nonprofits, and that we wait if the county adopts a residential moratorium, then we don't meet. If they don't adopt one, then we meet on Wednesday night.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say. Actually, we have to do it by roll call. Patrice, go ahead and call roll.
With pleasure, Mayor. Councilmember Pappin.
Aye.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Aye.
Councilmember Lee.
Aye.
Councilmember Bonilla,
Aye.
Mayor Goethals.
Nay.
That's 4-1.
Let me ask Sean, did we articulate that motion properly?
So let me answer by asking. So I what I believe was passage of the ordinance with respect to the business part. So section 4 on residential will not be included. The language that was added between the publication of the packet and tonight is included. So the administrative review provisions and the additional findings is included. And the clarification that the business entities include nonprofit entities is also included.
So to clarify,
Wait a
the
minute.
motion was, go ahead, Diane.
That the review process relates to the businesses. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And there's been a vote on it, and the vote was 4-1, right?
The businesses, I have no problem voting for the business portion of the ordinance tonight. I was voting no on waiting for the residential till Wednesday.
But hasn't a vote been taken and it's passed? Like what is there to discuss now?
Clarification of what the vote was.
So the vote was to approve the ordinance, but removing section 4, which is the section of the ordinance addressed to residential tenancies, with the changes that we discussed.
That's what I heard.
If the count,
Patrice?
Yes, sir.
I would like to change my vote to aye.
Then I have 5-0.
Okay. We will schedule another meeting for Wednesday night to come back and discuss the residential, and by then we will know what happened at the county.
and that was contingent on the county. If the county acts, then we weren't going to have the meeting. If the county doesn't act, we're going to have the meeting.
That is how I heard the motion as well. That's the motion I seconded.
And we will come back on Wednesday if there is no action tomorrow by the county. Now, I believe we have one other business item, which is reports and announcements. And Drew, you had a presentation or some reports and announcements, please.
Yes, I have a presentation on. Are you guys able to see my presentation?
See you.
My presentation up?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great. So just an update on where we are with COVID-19. So by way of background, there are currently declarations of emergency at the federal, state, county, and city level. There's a current county shelter-in-place order effective through April 7th, and so only essential operations are fully functional. Our municipal code requires that there is a confirmation by the council of the directives issued under a local declaration of emergency, so that's what we're here to do tonight. So I want to just give you an update on where we are operationally. Police and fire are fully operational right now. They've made some adjustments to working conditions. They're focused on balancing public safety with public health, and they are taking cautions to maintain the health of their personnel. And at the end of this presentation, I'm just going to ask Chief Barberini and Chief Iverson to chime in for a minute or two with more detailed updates of what's going on in police and fire. So with Public Works, what we have going right now is rotating crews that are maintaining critical infrastructure, and that's traffic, streets, sewers, and facilities. The wastewater treatment plant is fully operational. We are maintaining street sweeping downtown and in commercial areas so we don't fall behind. We are conducting inspections on public projects, and our main phone line is covered during business hours. So for Parks and Recreation, all rec facilities are closed and programs are canceled. Poplar Creek is also closed. Our parks are open, but we have just closed the playgrounds as of today. There's limited maintenance going on with trash and bathroom cleaning. And just today, we've also started to decide that the restrooms at some of the smaller parks are going to be closed for the time being, but the restrooms at the larger parks are going to remain open for the time being. And we've come up with enhanced signage as of today, just to message social distancing and smart and safe health practices during this health crisis. The senior lunch program is available currently for pickup, and we are keeping in touch with the participants in that program to make sure their needs are being met, and the main office phone line is being answered during business hours. For community development on the residential side, it's fully operational with some adjustments. So for inspections, we're trying to do virtual and video to the extent possible. We are processing plan checks and planning applications remotely by email or phone, if at all possible. And currently, we're not accepting new applications. On the commercial side, it's very limited operations based on the county's order. There's limited processing of plan checks and planning applications for existing projects. We're not taking new applications, and we're not doing inspections on commercial right now. Phone lines for housing, code enforcement, planning and building are answered during business hours. For the library, the main library and the branches are closed. Staff's answering questions remotely. We are not accruing fines on checked out items during the closure, and we've actually automatically extended checkout times to June 30th for everything that was out when we closed the library. And there's FAQs on the websites and a newsletter out to all patrons on the email list. For city administration, all essential services are fully functional. In terms of the status of our employee, for our essential functions, they're on site if necessary. Otherwise, they're working from home. For the most part, the essential functions do have staff on site because it is necessary for them to be there. For our non-essential functions, our salaried employees are working from home. Our non-salaried employees are working from home to the extent possible, and otherwise they're on paid administrative leave currently. And for our per diem employees, they are paid for their scheduled shifts through April 7th. So tonight I'm requesting council confirmation of the actions that I've taken in response to the emergency proclamation. And those would be the adjustments to the operations that I've outlined, the adjustments to the deployment of personnel, and the closure of city facilities. I'm also asking for confirmation of actions that I would like to take, which would be right now to defer April rent to the private tenants of city-owned properties, and also waiving any late fees for business license tax. And finally, for next steps, last week and the beginning of this week was really focused on shutting down a lot of the operation and really changing the way we work. And now we're focused on planning for any operational adjustments should the shelter in place continue past April the 7th. So we've got a couple weeks where we really need to plan what the operation is going to look like if this continues past the 7th of April. We're also working to quantify the financial impacts of COVID-19 on the city and what that recovery plan is going to look like. I'm expecting a pretty significant revenue impact, particularly for our hotel tax, with hotels seeing very little occupancy at this time. We are achieving some level of cost savings from not operating fully, but ultimately we're paying the employees, and that's the largest share of our operating expenditures. So we are not seeing a significant amount of savings in relation to the significant amount of revenue that we're losing at this time. There are a couple of policy level issues that have come up that I'm requesting a council subcommittee to help look into as we think about recovery, not just for the city operation itself, but for our community. Is what are our asks going to be of the state and federal government for our recovery efforts? And another policy related issue is we've been contacted by at least two different groups with pledges or considerations for financial assistance that are largely undefined, and we'd like to request some council assistance in developing the policy and what the interest is from council in working with these foundations, or if we want to go just push that into the county, the San Mateo Strong Fund that the county is creating. So, those are my asks. They're things that typically staff would come up with the policy recommendations and policy considerations and bring them back to council. But in this time, with staff pretty much fully working towards the operational impacts of working remotely and really trying to stabilize the operation, I could use some assistance from council in helping to develop some of the policy considerations to come back to the full council in the future.
Drew, do you already have volunteers for that?
I've talked to Councilmember Pappen and Councilmember Lee about different areas of this, and so if they were interested in volunteering, I'd certainly love the help.
I would move that we form a subcommittee and that we staff it with Councilmember Lee and Councilmember Pappen. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
I'm sorry, Mayor,
Aye.
Mr. Mayor.
Or
you
actually,
do,
I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Mayor,
We'll
you
do
need to
a
do that. Roll call vote.
roll call vote. Thank you, Patrice.
Councilmember Pappen?
Go ahead.
I'm here. I'm sorry. I was having problems with my mouse. So I'm a yes. Thank you for the offer, and I would love to do it.
Councilmember Bonilla?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Rodriguez?
Yes.
Councilmember Lee?
Happy to. Thank you.
And Mayor Goethals?
Yes.
That passes 5-0.
All right.
Now,
Thank you.
Sean, do we need to take public comment on the actions that Drew has taken and the actions that Drew proposed?
Have to unmute. Yes.
At this time, I'm going to ask for public comment on those two things. Do we have any public comment?
Mr. Mayor, I do not have any public comment.
Okay, then I will close the public comment period, bring it back to the council for a motion with regards to the actions that approving the actions that Drew has taken and proposed.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
I have a question for City Manager, Mr. Corbett, about our signage. Are our enhanced signs going to be multilingual?
I don't know the answer to that. If Parks and Recreation Director Kamzian is on the line, perhaps she can answer that. Sheila, are you there?
Perhaps that's something we can take offline.
Yeah.
I know that the county, in our phone calls with county officials, has made all of their resources available to us to try to accomplish those goals, to have as clear communication as possible with all communities. So that's definitely something we can work on offline. I think we all have that goal in mind, right?
Yes, we can do that.
Excellent. Good question. Thank you. Now, there was a motion to approve all Drew's actions and proposed actions. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye. Or actually, all in favor, please respond to the roll call vote from Patrice.
I am so sorry, Mr. Mayor. I missed the
That's okay.
who made the motion, please?
I guess it was me.
Okay. So thank you. Mayor Goethals?
Yes.
Councilmember Bonilla?
Yes.
Councilmember Lee?
So I am here. Can you hear me?
Hi, Sheila.
Hello. So,
That's something we can take offline. I know that the county, in our
Hello?
calls with county officials,
As
Sheila, are you
all
trapped
of
in
the
a box?
resources available to us to try to accomplish those goals, to have as clear communication as possible with all communities.
Sheila, you need
That's
to
definitely something we can
turn
work
off your
on.
stream.
Yeah.
Sheila, hold on 1 second. We're going to finish voting and then we'll get back to you. Go ahead.
Okay, Councilmember Lee,
Yes.
Councilmember Pappen,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Rodriguez.
Yes.
That's a 5-0.
Great. Drew, you wanted to let Ray and Ed speak, and then we'll give Sheila a chance as well. So let's hear from
Yes.
those three people.
Yes, Chief Barberina, you're up.
Great, thank you, sir. Good evening. I will be brief. In anticipation of the potential public reaction to the announcements made by both the Bay Area counties and the state last week, the police department increased its patrol staffing levels by moving personnel within the department from other ancillary duties to patrol. And we did this for a few reasons. One is we wanted to address some attention at what were identified as essential businesses, including grocery stores, gas stations, banks, and the like. Two, there were some concerns regarding businesses that were going to be forced to be closed that were considered non-essential in the security of those businesses. Three, we wanted to support the testing site, or we were asked to support the testing site at the San Mateo Event Center, which we did for the first 2 days as that stood up. We wanted to assume a high visibility role within the community, just to let the community know that we were out there, that the public safety services were not interrupted, and that there was no need for major concern. Fortunately, we did not have a reaction or response that required any significant law enforcement interaction. So we'd like to thank and commend the community for their response to those announcements. As we moved into this week, we've transitioned our staffing levels into more of a sustainability model, thinking long-term of how we are going to provide law enforcement services should our workforce be impacted by the COVID-19 virus. And we've done that by reassigning personnel, specifically those not assigned to traditional patrol duties, to work from home, both sworn and non-sworn, those working in administrative roles and those working in investigative capacity that can perform some of those functions at home. That provides us with, in essence, a reserve force should we have an impact to our existing patrol force that would allow us to tap personnel that are not exposed daily to folks inside the police department. We're also working with neighboring agencies to both be able to lend support and to call on them should we need support in both patrol and dispatch services, are two most crucial. I'd like to point out that both the increased staffing levels and the transition to the sustainability model that we've made have been done with mostly with personnel that are regularly scheduled with a very, very limited impact on overtime. So I'd like to thank our command staff for doing that. To this point, we've had no existing impact on staff as a result of the virus. We've taken significant measures in keeping our personnel safe. Three staff members within the police department have been designated as full-time safety officers, and they're doing a number of tasks in addition to monitoring personnel to make sure that nobody is displaying symptoms of the virus. They're ensuring that personal protective equipment is available and accessible to staff that needs that. We've closed the police department lobby to public access, and we're taking all reports and inquiries by the phone that's just outside the lobby in the vestibule. We've closed the gym within the police department, which has not made everybody happy, but given what's going on in other parts of the country, we've identified that as a place of risk, and we don't want to expose folks unnecessarily. Our safety members are producing daily safety updates to staff. They've established decontamination stations at the police department, and we've limited the entrance and egress points within the department to minimize exposures. We've gone so far as even holding patrol briefings outside, which was something that the patrol sergeants came up with on their own, and we thought was a pretty good idea. As far as calls for service, over the last week, fortunately, our 911 emergency calls have been down 20% from the same time period of the previous year. Our non-emergency calls, as you can expect, have gone up about 3 to 5%. Most of those calls, or several of those calls, are related to the existing virus, and most of them are questions about what folks can do, what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do, what is an essential business, what is not. We've been addressing most of those and referring some of those inquiries to the county's 211 line that they've established. In addition to all those calls for service going up and down, our proactive passing checks of the locations I mentioned before have been robust. We have several hundred passing checks in the first week per day, and I'd like to commend staff for the manner in which they've addressed this. As you can imagine, it's not an easy environment to work in. While other folks are asked to participate in social distancing, their primary job is to interact with individuals, and we're trying to do that as safely as possible. But they do have the same concerns as everyone else for themselves and their family, and I'd like to commend the way they've responded to this crisis. Also, from a public outreach standpoint, we would like to encourage folks to report non-emergency reports or calls for service by utilizing our online option, which is available via our webpage. That's all I have to report. I'm going to turn it over to Chief Iverson. I'll be happy to answer any questions after that. Thanks. Chief?
So this City Clerk Gold.
Hello, good evening. This is Ray Iverson, the Fire Chief, San Mateo Consolidated. Update for the fire department. Both of our offices remain closed to the public, and our administrative staff are working remotely. We have suspended all non-essential activities. Out of our 12 fire companies, all are fully staffed and operational. We are operating out of all 9 fire stations. Our emergency service workforce is at 95% strength. Between the dates of March 16th through March 22nd, we responded to 197 calls for service. Of those calls for service, 130 were EMS related. That signifies a call deficit 29% down from where we were last year. We have taken steps to minimize exposure to our crews and our first responders. Some of the actions we have taken include changes to our medical response procedures. We've alternatively changed our uniforms. We've enhanced our PPE, which is our personal protective equipment application. We have worked with our fire agencies countywide and have developed contingency plans to modify our service delivery should it become necessary. I'd like to turn it back over to City Manager Drew Corbett.
Thanks, Chief Iverson. Is Sheila on and available to answer the question that was outstanding for her?
Drew, we can hear you now.
Okay, is Sheila on? Is she there to answer the question, the outstanding question we had?
So this is Sheila Kanzian. I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Sheila, they can hear you.
I'm sorry?
Yes, they can hear you.
Thank you. So to address Council Member Lee's question, yes, we actually sent off the signs to be printed today to the local FAST signs. They are written in both English and Spanish. And as soon as they come back on Wednesday, we'll be posting those at every location, every entry location at every park in San Mateo.
That's great, Sheila. Thank you so much for that. Does that answer your question, Amarantz? And also, Amarantz, I think you had another question for Chief Barberini. Is that right?
Yes. Thank you, Sheila, for that. I've gotten some feedback from community members about needing signs in multiple languages, so that's great news. So I had a question for Chief Barberini about our homeless community and how we are interfacing with the county's efforts to search out people who are unhoused and get them into shelter situations. Is that something that we're also working on?
Yes, so our downtown officers are still working downtown actively with the where we see a concentration of our transient population. They know most of those individuals and are familiar with them and are offering and providing services. And I know that the county has made some temporary housing available for those individuals. So the answer is yes. We continue to work with the homeless population even through this difficult time through the existing resources that we had done before. Those resources dedicated towards that mission have not been reallocated. They've just been focused on protecting that segment of the population as well as the downtown area. So the answer is yes. We continue to proactively outreach to that group and encourage them to take advantage of the services that are available, which are a little bit more robust now than they are traditionally have been. I don't know if that answers your question.
That's great news. I know that this is a serious concern and question for a lot of community members, and I think that it's a great story to tell that you are currently working on, and so I hope that we can find a way to communicate this to the public, that the PD is working in partnership with the county to make sure that that our transient community members are finding shelter and taking advantage of the additional resources that are available.
We will make an effort to get that word out.
And then my other question was, as council members, how can, what ways can we support you to communicate to the public in terms of where you might be under-resourced, or how the public is interfacing with you? And, I heard that I heard that it was helpful for us to send the message to not call 911 unless it's an emergency. Are there other steps that council members can be taking, ways that we can be supporting communication out to the community to make your job easier and to be judicious with resources?
I appreciate the offer and thank you very much. Fortunately, we're in a pretty good place right now from both the staffing level and call for service level. However, it may help to educate the public a little bit that we are managing calls for service differently than we've done in the past. We're encouraging officers to contact reporting parties by telephone when those calls do not require personal interaction. And we're also encouraging online reporting. We do, just like Chief Iverson mentioned, we have a contingency plan where if our staffing is impacted, we have a plan for that on what calls will be prioritized and what calls we simply won't be able to respond to anymore. We're not near that point yet, but if the word could get out that if you call the police department for a non-emergency call and you receive a phone call rather than an officer in your front door, there's a reason for that, and it's in the interest of the public safety as well as our own staff. So that would probably be the strongest message at this point is, we pride ourselves on being responsive and interacting with the public, and it's foreign to us to look for ways not to do that. But unfortunately, given the circumstance, that's what we face right now. So if we could just make people aware of that and why it's happening, that's probably the strongest message right now.
That's great. And then my last question was about the personal protective equipment. I know that on the medical side, that's a serious concern because of a shortage. Is that also true that we could be looking at a shortage of PPE for our first responders? Is that bit where where are we with that? And what's the horizon in terms of a potential shortage?
So I will say that and I'll let Chief Iverson address the fire personnel, but from a police department perspective, we're in a pretty good place right now. Our main focus are N95 masks, gloves, and eye protection. The one area where we seem to be experiencing the most significant challenges is eye protection, but we're working to address that. Otherwise, I think we're in a pretty good place. However, we don't know how long we're going to have to sustain that. So We're always looking to make sure that our personnel are equipped with what they need, and our safety officers are working on that on a daily basis. I'd also like to thank Sheila, who's been managing logistics and helping us acquire that type of equipment. But I don't want to say there's enough, because we don't know what we're looking at. There's likely never enough. But for now, we're in a pretty decent place. I'm not sure if Chief Iverson has anything to add to that.
Yes. Hello, this is Ray. We do have a stock of N95 masks. We had a gracious donation from one of the businesses in the community for the fire department, and we're utilizing those masks. And in addition to that, if anyone wants to donate a mask, they can contact our Emergency Operations Center and donate masks through that means.
And if I could just add, it is a concern, the PPE for our field workers in Parks and Recreation and Public Works and folks in the plant, as well as our inspectors. We do have a limited supply right now, but it is a concern, again, as Chief Barberini mentioned. It's just a matter of how long this lasts and how long we're going to need to utilize that equipment. We are working through the EOC to see if we can procure more PPE, but it is definitely one of the top handful of things on our mind as we move forward.
Okay, and sorry, just one more question. I'm sorry to ask so many questions, but I'm also curious in terms of our own first responders and our access to the testing. So, where are we in the line to get our first responders tested? And are we looking at creating a second tier of first responders if there's a shortage, or our first responders become ill and are unable to continue working?
So I'll start with that answer, and then the chiefs can fill in the blanks if they need to. So with respect to testing, the county has recognized the need to prioritize testing for first responders. The details of that are still forthcoming. The largest issue right now is just access to tests. And so that's been the problem. But each day we have a conference call with the county manager, all the city managers do, and that is a topic that is being discussed, and I believe they're developing a policy and a procedure to get those first responders tested. As to the second line, I think that is a matter of countywide mutual aid. If there were a situation where we had a rash of officers that needed to go out, we would start looking to call on other cities in the county, just as they would call upon us if they had a similar situation. And then we would go from there and start widening that net as necessary in terms of geographically, if we were to get in a situation where we had a critical number of officers out. And I think that sort of underscores the importance of what both Chief Barberini and Chief Iverson are doing in terms of their personnel planning and making sure that they're having folks at home when possible, so that folks have the best opportunity to stay healthy and avoid exposure so they can serve when needed.
Thank you. Thank you for all your work.
Of course.
Okay. So unless there's more comments or more questions, I think that's everything we wanted to cover. I do want to make a couple final announcements. First, a big, huge thank you to Patrice. This was our first virtual meeting. She brought it all together on very short notice. Patrice, I thought that this worked way better than most of the attempts that I've seen out there. So I really appreciate all the time and effort you put into this. Thank you very much, Patrice. Sean, I think that what we should do is we should notice a meeting for Wednesday, and then we should notice a meeting for next Monday. I think we're going to have a meeting for updates from Drew next Monday, irrespective of what happens tomorrow. But as far as the meeting for Wednesday, we'll notice it, and then if the county acts tomorrow, we'll just cancel it. Is that the appropriate way to go about that?
That would be fine. I'll work with Patrice to make sure that the noticing is done.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Let's see. Drew, I want to echo what was just said. Thank you for your hard work. Thank you for everybody's hard work. Sean, Patrice, the chiefs, everybody in the EOC. We know how much incredible work is happening. And so we are very, very appreciative of it. The surge is coming. The surge is coming, and primarily we're concerned with the response to the public health crisis, but it's never too soon to think about people's peace of mind and making sure that they sleep a little bit better at night and preparing for the economic impacts that are coming as well. But stay the course. We appreciate everything you're doing. Unless there's anything else, then this meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.